The Daily Derech. We are walking the path of holiness.
Hello, everybody. This is Rabbi Marcus Rubenstein. Welcome to the Daily Derech, a special project of Exploring Judaism, the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, the Rabbinical Assembly, and Temple of Aaron. Today is the third day after Shabbat Kodesh, the 24th of Sivan, 5786, corresponding in the secular calendar to Tuesday, June 9th, 2026. We will read Parashat Shlach this coming Shabbat. Let's begin. Me'am Loez. One of the stranger things that we find within our Parsha is this transgression that we see that that the spies do by bringing back bad report about the land, as we're going to see within our Parsha, happens at Moses' own will. We actually see within the Parsha that it says, Shlach lecha, send for yourself. This is not a commandment that God asks Moses to give to the spies or to the Jewish people, but rather it is something specifically that must come from the opinion of Moses, because it says, Shlach lecha, send for yourself. So why is this the case? What is the meaning of this strange lecha here? We actually see that Moses was unsure of what to do. He wasn't sure whether the real reason they wanted to go was because they did not have faith in Hashem, or whether the reason was a strategic decision to make sure that the enemies of the Jewish people didn't hide the resources that they needed. And he wasn't quite sure. So the Me'am Loez actually says that Moshe consults Hashem, that Moses consulted the Shekhinah, the indwelling presence of God. And all God says to Moshe at this point, according to the Me'am Loez, is they are capable of misleading you, for you are flesh and blood and do not fathom the hidden recesses of their hearts. They tell you that the scouts should be sent for the purpose of locating the places of hoarding, but I, who test the innermost parts of men, know that what prompts them is a lack of faith in me. Although I have already told them that it is a good land, they wish to know the quality of the land. Nor is this the first time that they betray a lack of faith in my words. Already in Egypt they had begun to offend me in this matter, and I will say nothing more to you about this matter. If you wish, send them. So what we do see here is that God refuses to tell Moses whether to do it or not, but he makes very clear to Moshe the what's going on inside of these spies' heads who want to scout out the land, and what really is going on here, saying they're not doing this for the right reason. They're doing this because they lack faith in me. This is a trait that is continued and since all the way since Egypt. It is just a part of this people, and it's really up to you. It's something that's going to be really important to you as a leader to not fall for this per se, and not rationalize it. But in the end, God leaves it up to Moshe's decision, and Moses obviously makes the wrong decision here to send them. He should not have done that. And he should have listened to what God understood of what their attitude really is. And I think this happens to be with the fact that Moses is a human being and understands these people being scared and needing to scout out the land and wanting to make sure they get what they're supposed to get. So I think Moshe sort of has more empathy for the people standing in front of him and has love for Bnei Israel, which is why he eventually lets them do this. But at this point in time, once you know the intention of a person, of why they're doing a particular action, even if you understand from a human reason of why someone might want to do that, in the end, what matters is the actual intention of what you're trying to accomplish. And if the intention is coming out of a lack of faith in Hashem and in God's promises, we should stop that no matter how much, no matter how understandable that desire is. If it's up to you, you shouldn't obviously push it to happen, and we see the damage that resulted from it. Mishnah Torah. We're to go on learning the Mishnah Torah, and still in the laws of Talmud Torah and the laws of Torah study. We're on chapter 4, halacha 4. This is about how a Rav should be teaching a student, how a teacher should be teaching a student, and specifically how many times does a rabbi need to teach something over and over again? Should they get frustrated with the student? Things like this. So the Rambam says here, if the teacher taught a concept and it was not grasped by the students, he should not become upset with them and display anger. Rather, he should repeat and review the matter, even if he must do so many times, until they appreciate the depth of the halacha. So really what's going on here is a case when someone is trying to teach something, but the concept itself is not being grasped. For whatever reason, the student is not able to understand it. Now, I don't think this is a case necessarily where the student does not want to grasp the information, is just bored, which is something that teachers of Torah bump into often. But this is a case where genuinely the student can't understand what the person is saying. And a lot of concepts within Torah, as you well know, are very, very complicated, surprisingly complicated, honestly. I never realized Torah was as complicated as it was until I began learning it myself. Very, very difficult. And so in order to teach it accurately, one, the teacher has to be committed to teaching it accurately and patiently, slowly, and to never ever just get angry and display anger. And it's interesting what how he teaches this here. Lo yichas aleim v'yirgaz, right? And he should not get angry and get frustrated and everything like this. And it is frustrating. It is hard to when someone doesn't get what you're trying to say. Communicating anything and trying to communicate something and the other person doesn't understand is pretty much one of the more frustrating things that you have to go through. And rabbis have to go through this all the time. But what's really important is to constantly repeat the teaching over and over and over again, trying to find new and different ways of explaining the material so the student in front of you can understand it. That is what a teacher does. That's what a rabbi does. And honestly, to have almost infinite patience for teaching Torah, and until the student understands it. Now, on the student side of this, he then says, certainly the student should not say, I understand, when he did not understand. Rather, he should ask again and again, even if he requires several repetitions. And so there's also a responsibility of the student here to not say, I understand, or yeah, I get it, when they don't really get it. But rather, even if it's hundreds of times, to still say, sorry, I don't understand. And then for the teacher then the student to then come up with a question of, what do they not understand? What particular part do they not understand? Or what do they understand? So the teacher can, in a better way, help the student. But there's an expression within our Torah that says, the Baishan never learns. The shy person doesn't learn. So many of us are so shy to say and embarrassed to say we don't understand because we think somehow we should have understood, and we're not, people think we're smarter than that, so we don't say that we're confused to the teacher publicly. All of that stuff is a transgression. It really is a Torah that could be learned that's not learned. In order to really learn Torah, you have to have radical humility and radical honesty to say, I don't understand something when you don't understand it. And the teacher has to have radical patience to be really committed to actually teaching Torah so that the person actually understands the Torah. Otherwise, it's not really teaching Torah. If they don't understand it, then it's not really teaching. It's just you shouting or speaking. So if the teacher is truly committed to teaching the Torah so that it's actually received, then this shouldn't be the most hard thing in the whole entire world. But sometimes the teacher needs to be reminded of this. Sometimes the student needs to be reminded of this, of what is the true intention of Torah. Is it to prove how smart I am and how much I know, or is it to really understand the Torah deeply? Now, last line, he says, if his teacher becomes upset with him and displays anger, he should tell him, my teacher, this is Torah. It is necessary that I study, and my powers of comprehension are weak. Right? So what happens in the situation where the student is doing the right thing and he's asking questions over again, but the teacher is not acting correctly. He's getting angry, he's getting upset, and everything like this. So what is the student to do? This is a very hard situation for the student to be in. So the Rambam says to him that you should tell the teacher, one, remind the teacher that it is your teacher, and secondly, remind the teacher that this is Torah. This is not something random or something non-holy. It's Torah. It needs to be treated with a certain amount of respect and patience, and what is the intention of what you're trying to do here. It's necessary that he studies, right? He has to say, I have to learn more. And to admit that the student's powers of comprehension, this understanding powers or capability of understanding happens to be weak at the present moment. And So therefore, the teacher has to work harder. And look, I think as long as the student is honest and the teacher is honest about where they're at, that's how the most teaching of Torah can happen, so that it's actually received clearly. And if it's not received at all, it's really a waste of time. It really is. And both teacher and student should be less forgiving with teaching things that that the student doesn't really understand. We do this so much in Judaism, where people just nod their heads, and this is a very, very horrible transgression that happens within our world today. And we really need to work on being less afraid of asking questions and saying, I don't understand. Teachers need to be less frustrated and angry all the time, and be able to repeat things in different ways, and be patient with their students, and really care whether their students actually really understand the information or not. I know there are many good teachers out there just like that, and I know there are many good students just like this. But I do think we need more of this within our world today. Menorat HaMaor. We'll continue learning the introduction to the first candle here, and we'll continue learning stories, interesting stories about how rabbis gained some of their sustenance and how difficult a time they had just gaining the basic necessities of life, which is all to tell you that just because one learns a lot of Torah and acts righteously and does the right thing doesn't mean that they won't encounter financial stress and live the easy life. That certainly is not the reward of Judaism. What's being brought today is this idea that according to the natural order of reality, obtaining substance was more difficult for the rabbis than receiving miracles and wonders, right? So it's easier for God and more normal for God to do miracles and wonders for these incredible righteous people than actually changing the order of reality by giving them sustenance and actual substance of what they need. And we see this in Shabbat 53b. So our rabbis taught there was once a man whose wife died and left behind an infant son to nurse, which is a very, very difficult thing, because the infant needs milk. It needs the mother to nurse. So very painful. He did not have the means to hire a wet nurse, right? Because obviously this would have been expensive. A miracle occurred, and his two breasts opened like those of a woman, and he nursed his son. So we actually have this story in the rabbi that there's this miracle that this man grew mammary glands and breasts to provide for his son. Now, it would seem like it would be much easier for God to just make milk appear, right? Or just bring cups of breast milk or something like that, if that's really what the baby needed. Why go through all this craziness to make the man have breasts and mammary glands, right? This seems to be the harder route that God took here. Rav Yosef said, "Come and see how great this man was, for such a miracle has performed him," right? So that God gave him and performed for him this miracle that was absolutely incredible. And it's important to understand that this actual miracle is in some ways deeper than just getting some glasses of breast milk or whatever it may be for this infant, because, well, that infant might have had milk that day, but then wouldn't have had the milk the other days, because the great thing about breasts and mammary glands is that they can continue to produce milk. So, instead of just giving this man a one-time gift, God enabled this man to support the growth of the infant for a good amount of time in the time of need. But Abaye reacts differently and says to him, on the contrary, how deficient this man was, that the order of creation had to be altered on his behalf. So Abaye generally says that and understands that any time creation itself is mixed up, meaning obviously here a man having breasts and that God has to sort of change the order of creation, it's sort of undignifying for God, because maybe God should have designed the world better than having to reverse the system in which God created the world. And so this is actually deficient, and maybe, in some ways, at least the way Abaye is saying it here, wrong. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, come and see how difficult a person's sustenance is, for the order of creation was altered for him. And so Rav Yehuda then says in the name of Rav, basically, we should understand from this just like how difficult it is for a man, for a human being to gain their basic needs in this world, that literally God had to change the order of creation just so a human being, even a righteous human being, could have food to eat and to feed an infant. That's how difficult it is this world. It is not a easy thing to gain sustenance in this world. And again, if we experience hardship, if we experience affliction, if we feel like we don't have the needs that we have in our lives, that doesn't mean that God is not here for us. It just means that at this point in time, we don't have us, and we suffer greatly for this. But we should always remember there is an olam haba, right? There is an eternal world. And of course, this will pale to everything in the world to come. This story ends with Rav Nachman saying, you can know this to be true, for a miracle occurred, yet food itself was not created for him. Right? So God would rather create and make this miracle of having a man who has breasts and mammary glands and be able to feed an infant than making food appear. That's how it seems that God is not either willing or it's just not what God can easily do. I'm just trying to read the story simply here to actually make food, make the actual product appear. I think in a bigger sense, just looking at this whole entire idea is that why is God more willing to give a man breasts and mammary glands than just give the milk to the baby? The idea in general is that God is more, usually tends to give more give more freely so that a human being can support themselves and their family for the long term instead of one-time gifts. God is not a fan of short-term temporary benefits, but things that actually enable a person to stand on their own 2 feet. This is actually true, of course, in the tzedakah we give as well, that tzedakah is really favored not as a one-time gift, but as something that we do for somebody else that enables them to actually have a job and to actually be able to sustain themselves on their own 2 feet. So does God do miracles and give in the same way.
Well, that's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Daily Derech. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to email me anytime at rmr@templeofaaron.org. Thank you so much for listening. There are so many people to thank, and you can look in the show notes for that. And also, if you want to know and see any of these texts in the original, we actually have that too. You can actually find that in our episode description. So look in each of the episode descriptions and you'll find that information right there. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.